Hello, it's Terry Etam here, the author of The End of Fossil Fuel Insanity.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us here today. Also a writer for the BOE Report and a blogger for his very own Public Energy #1. Are you still doing those two things too?
I am, as much as I can.
So, First of all, before we get into the book, go ahead and give yourself a plug for the three different sites you do for. You're an author, so you get your book available at Amazon and also bookstores. And then you've got your BOE Report, which is a news outlet, and then you've got your blog, which for some reason you're a blog, man. You made it through the blogging graveyard, which you know that. I mean, what was it? 99 out of 100 blogs are in the graveyard somewhere. So.
Yeah, that's right. Most people don't carry on with them, so I guess I just either care or I'm interested or some combination of the two. I guess what bugs me most is the energy ignorance out there, and it's just too annoying to let slip past. Character flaw of mine.
Public Energy #1. Talk to me about that.
So I started that. That's where I started writing back in 2014, and it was basically just to answer questions for friends. I've always liked writing, and it was just kind of an outlet that I could write, and I would people would say, I get a call from a friend or something outside the oil patch saying, what's fracking all about, or is it really dangerous or whatever? So I just write up an article and send it to, not even an article, just like a answer, and try and expand it in a way that's readable, because even a lot of people will say that they're interested in fracking, but they really aren't. They just, once you get into the weeds of what it actually is, their eyes glaze over pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I would try and make it readable for them, and then I would get these feedback from people saying, hey, this is great, do you mind if I send it around, or you made it understandable, or whatever. And I enjoyed doing it, so then I just thought I'd put it on a blog, and I had to do it anonymously to start with, because I was a spokesman for a pipeline company at the time who wouldn't have appreciated me being a spokesman for anything else. So it was like my nighttime hobby. I would go answer these questions, post them online. I would enjoy writing them. And then, like you said, most blogs fail because people just aren't. It takes a lot of work, but I liked it. And then, luckily, it just started building. And then I started writing for the BOE Report, which is an industry trade site. So that's a little bit more hardcore oil and gas, and we get into more issues about that impact the industry. And then the book just kind of flowed out of all of that too. I kept getting requests from people saying that I like how you write about energy and you make it relatable. How do we make this relatable for more and more people? So I wrote the book kind of from the viewpoint of, or for people that don't know anything about energy, just try and get the context out there to them. People get fed a lot of stuff in the news and the media that's just profoundly untrue about, for example, how easy it's going to be to go all renewable or something. And there's a lot of vested interests that push that theme, and it's just not even true. And I wouldn't care if people, there's a lot of things that people believe out there that are wrong, but this is impacting our policy. And we see that, you see it there, we see it here, where our industry is under siege. People are trying to wipe out the hydrocarbon industry, but it's the fuel that keeps everyone alive, and it's just this paradox, which it's almost insanity, which ties to the title of my book. But it's happening, and we can't let people get away with it.
Terry Etam is with us, the man, the myth, the legend, the author, writer, and blogger, and going through his professional passion, which has led him to where he's at today. It's one of the many reasons why we like to check in with Mr. Terry Etam here on the Crude Life is, number one, he's put his money where his mouth is. His hobby has turned into a nice side profession, which turned into a profession, which has turned into a great lifestyle for him. The other reason is he lives in Canada. So he's got a different international perspective on it. And it's not just for your accent or your covered about and boat. We like to make fun of your accent, but at the same time, you've got a very socialized lifestyle up there, a lot more than the United States.
Don't we?
So I like to compare and contrast some of the international energy things, and that's actually one of the things I wanted to bring you on today about was this article I got that I sent you that talks about just really some of the woes that Europe is having when it comes to renewable energy, this aggressive crash course that they seem to be on to get on renewables and off fossil fuels, right? And I don't even know if that Germany, which is the poster child, even got to a third. I thought I saw 30%, but for some reason I thought it might have been under 30. So just being generous, let's say they got a third of their grid to renewables. That wasn't sustainable. They had to turn on the coal plants, and it also made their energy their energy bills 3 to 4 times what they were already paying. So there was really not a lot of positive that came out of it. And in the headline, it said, Canada, you're next. And so I thought, okay, this will be fun. But in that first line, it said energy poverty. And to me, that's just socialism. To me, when you call something energy poverty, that is done by regulation, because there's a lot of options out there. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
That's exactly what it is. Oh, yeah. No, it's entirely created by regulation. It's like you said. It's a problem of their own making. Well, and Germany is so ironic as a poster child. They had a lot of power from nuclear, which is as green as it gets. I mean, some people don't like the waste, but you can't deny that the power generated by nuclear is clean. And for whatever reason, they decided to get rid of nuclear. They panicked and said, we have to close all our nuclear plants. And then this is where the ignorance part comes in. And then the people that had the politicians' ears said, well, let's just go to wind and solar. That's how you replace nuclear. And, oh, yeah, there's that dirty old coal in the background, but we'll get rid of that too. And as it turns out, well, it's not so easy. And they still get a quarter, I think, from coal. And they've gone full on into this wind and solar push. And it has, as you pointed out, or you showed me in that article, which is true, the costs skyrocket for the average citizen. The reliability of the grid goes down because now you're dependent on an intermittent source, which you can't count on, and you still need a backup supply of reliable power. And the costs of there's very few articles that seem to make the news internationally, especially about the actual cost that people face. And this energy poverty yardstick here, that's just fascinating. The percentage of people that spend, forget what a significant component of their income on power. It's huge across the states. Some of those are poor EU countries. You mentioned it's coming to Canada. It's kind of ironic because in Ontario, our biggest province here, which is mainly a manufacturing place, but it's their economy is manufacturing based. But they had a green government come in about 10 years ago or so, and they decided to go all green too. And I found another article talking about how the uproar that happened there, people's bills, electrical bills doubled. Some of the rural areas, some places were seeing their electricity bills at $1,000 a month. And that was gone up like fivefold from what it had been before. And that's thanks to going to go to green energy. And Ontario is blessed with tons of hydroelectric power. They've got dams and a lot of that. But the European thing is so stark that this is what happens when you try and push it without understanding all the second and third order consequences.
These articles are so maddening to me because they leave out so much of the context. Like I said, this article is pretty much to sell the word energy poverty. And that bothers me because it's almost like the great philosopher George Carlin. You know George Carlin, the great philosopher, when he got into his shell shock and PTSD and battlefield fatigue, and when he got into soft language, and he talked about how if you change the language enough and you make it soft enough and all this other stuff, pretty soon it doesn't have the same effect that it does before. And it talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, which we now call PTSD. It was called battlefield fatigue, but originally it was called shell-shocked, shell-shocked. I mean,
right.
And he brings up a great point that if we'd continue calling it that, it probably would have been funded differently, and it would have been. I look at this the same way. I mean, you start saying energy poverty, we're so acceptance to the word poverty now that we just let government take care of it. And that's what they're doing here now.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, we'll just let the government take care of the energy bills for everybody. That's something we need. And it's is this how deep is this in Canada, I guess? Because the thing that I'm trying to not put my conspiracy mind around is it almost seems like they're trying to usher in socialism through energy in the United States.
Oh, you hit the nail squarely on the head. And I think that there's one bad habit that we've fallen into is the energy sector, hydrocarbon sector, is we speak out against environmentalists, but there's true environmentalists, and then there's the climate change crowd, and they're two totally different beasts. Environmentalists are people that want to lower their footprint, they want to live a cleaner life, they want to get better mileage with their car, they buy a Honda Civic instead of a big SUV or whatever, and they recycle, and all of those good things. And I call them the Mother Earth news crowd, because that's the way they live, grow their own vegetables where they can and that sort of thing. The climate change people are political beasts, and I think that they're just smuggling in, they're using the environmental cause to the European guys, some of them are quite open that they want to overthrow capitalism. You can read this in publications like The Guardian out of the UK. Some of their poster child editorialists there talk about how the only way to save the climate is to overthrow capitalism. They're quite blatant about it, and that's coming into the States. AOC, how do you pronounce her name? Alexandria or whatever. Your little poster child down there. That like her and Bernie Sanders would love to overthrow capitalism. They want to become democratic socialists, they call it, but they want state control of things, and that it's a power grab in a sense. And I firmly believe that that's true. That they're using the environment as a means to do that. And you're right. They convince people, we'll look after your power bill. The state we'll get the money from somewhere. We'll squeeze it out of something. We'll get everybody in an electric vehicle by giving you back $10,000 if you buy one. Go buy a Tesla, and we'll give you a check for $10,000 or $7,000 or whatever they do in California. And it's a broken market, and as you see in Europe, and the closer you get to full implementation, the harder and harder it becomes. There's one article about how the true expense of Germany going green, and you can get to 10% level of renewables or something without too much bother, and then 20% is more of a challenge, and then after that, every incremental 10% just becomes much, much harder and more expensive. And like you said, they're not even Germany might be a third renewable, and that's a dangerous, slippery slope to go on when you talk about how much percent they get from renewable, because people get confused with how much capability they have versus how much they actually require of each source. But anyways, Germany's gone a long ways, and it's cost them an absolute fortune, hundreds of billions of dollars. I think over $500 billion I've seen estimates. And their emissions haven't gone down at all over the past 10, 15 years. And they're still projected to not go down. They're still trying to expand a coal mine in Germany. They're trying to knock down a forest. And these protesters are hanging out in the forest, for no surprise there, because they're trying to get it, leave the forest intact. So this is happening in the heartland of the green revolution. So it just doesn't work. You can't demonize the petroleum industry and try and do what they're doing. And the world looks like it just has to find out the hard way. Nobody will listen until they see it.
We've gone back several years. Terry Etam with the BOE Report, Public Energy #1, also the author of the End of Fossil Fuel. Let's start Fossil Fuel Insanity. What's the exact title again?
The End of Fossil Fuel Insanity. You got it.
The End of the Fossil Fuel Insanity. Okay.
I'll take a copy.
And yeah, pick it up, Amazon.com. We'll have links at our show page here at the Crude Life. By the way, the Crude Life podcast, we can be a little more relaxed during the podcast. Like, I use nicknames now because, because of the environmental movement and how I was talking about the smoking ban and the cigarette parallel 5 years ago. In fact, probably you and I interviews 3 years ago, we were talking about it. They're calling me the Shale Play Prophet. So I'm loving that. And the North Dakota Nomad, because, I move around and we do here at the Crude Life, though, we do talk about topics that a lot of people don't talk about. We try to stay ahead of the curve. We try to stay proactive. You've been one that has been following the rise of the environmental movement with me for a long time. Of course, you're in Canada, so you've got a completely different perspective. I do want to get your perspective of my comparison to the smoking ban. And I've been saying this for a while now, that I really think the energy industry, they're still caught up in an energy debate, when I think the activists have been going at it, especially this year, from a public health debate, so much so that Jim Cramer compared tobacco companies to oil companies just over the weekend. So your thoughts on that? Because you and I have been talking about this for over 3 years.
Yeah, well, it's outrageous, but in some ways it's our own fault. Like you said, that we've allowed it to come to this. First of all, any comparison between tobacco and petroleum is just so ludicrous it leaves me breathless. How many people, anyone out there listening, anywhere on Earth, I dare you to live for as long without fossil fuels as you can without tobacco products. Tobacco products add nothing to life other than some brief pleasure for those that enjoy it, and they cut your lifespan down, whereas petroleum products or hydrocarbons or fossil fuels, whatever you want to call them, we can't live without them for half an hour, especially here in the winter. So the comparison is just ludicrous, and that somebody like Kramer would say that. Well, I'm not a fan of his, so it's not that surprising, but it just shows you the intellectual short-circuiting that people make with zero thought into these things. They don't attempt to contextualize it properly. They just take these messages and they sound simplistic. They're sound bites, and they're provided by the so-called environmental movement, but it's really the climate change movement that's doing it. And you're right; they're so far ahead of us, the petroleum sector, as far as the messaging and the smearing and well, they've got an army of people doing this. If you go to any climate activist website, there's like dozens here in Canada, but just pull up one of their websites. Go to 350.org, go to Greenpeace, go to Sierra Club, go to any of these, and just look at the army of people that they have working for them. All of these, and I don't even know where all the money comes from, but it's a lot of money. But I think it's the likes of Michael Bloomberg and whatnot. But they're well-paid professionals, and they sit there. They produce nothing. All they're trying to do is undermine the petroleum sector and push their agenda. And they have nothing better to do literally all day than come up with messages to counteract whatever we want to talk about. If we want to talk about, if we want to put messages out there into the public realm about how much people rely on petroleum products, or let's say how many things in your household are made out of petroleum products, and it's virtually everything. It's either made from it or it was brought there to you by petroleum products. They're working on messages to shut that down, and that's why they. If they can't counteract it directly, they come up with something like Greta, who's a little figurehead, and that's their job. And they're very good at it, and we haven't been good at it. We're 10 miles behind them in terms of messaging, and we're paying the price for it. But I hope that enough people out there take it seriously that they're willing to put together their own social media armies and start playing in the same battlefield that they are, because we're losing. Like you said, we're losing the legislative war. We're losing. You get people like Kramer, who's not the wisest guy around, anyways. But when he speaks, a lot of people listen to him. And when he says things like that, people take that message and they absorb it as being some sort of truth, just because he's so outspoken and out there. And we need to have somebody in Kramer's ear saying that that's nonsense, because it is.
The thing that I'm taking away from this, too, that I'd like your opinion on, because I don't know if I've asked you this or not, since Greta Thunberg, who you mentioned, was named Times Person of the Year. As soon as that happened, the very next day, in fact, that night, for anybody who would listen, I was on record saying that Time Magazine, by stamping that, by making her the Time Person of the Year, not only made the environment the topic of 2020, but it also made existential fear in children cool. And what I mean by that is, in California, did I send you that article about the kids drenching themselves in oil in Sacramento?
No.
So in Sacramento, California last week, to protest the teachers' pension fund, which apparently has some fossil fuel monies tied to it in a roundabout way, They used children to protest at the state capitol drenched in fake oil and a 12-year-old teens, 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. They used children in order to basically pass a political agenda. And that's what's going on. And all I could think of was, now that they're using children for protests as the centerpiece, this is no different than when I take my kid to, the pizza buffet after the basketball game. I mean, that's what I see these parents doing, that I truly believe, and I hope I'm not right on this with my shale play profitness, but I think there's going to be some parent that'll look at their kid as the next Aaron Brockovich against the fossil fuel industry, and that worries me.
I think we're there already in Canada. Like there's
thanks for that. You're like, we're already there, big guy.
Well, yeah. There's before Christmas there was a group of, I think it was 13 kids got paraded out onto a stage in Vancouver, and they announced that they were suing when Greta was in town in our country here, and they announced that they were suing the federal government for not doing enough for climate change. And it's just such a well-orchestrated thing. These kids are like 13, and they have a bunch of lawyers behind them. And it takes, in Canada, it's a challenge to launch a lawsuit like that. But they've got all sorts of legal help. They've got all of these groups funding it. And the lawyers have done all the paperwork. And here's these little kids up there talking outrageous nonsense about how they can't go outside because it's cold out, because of climate change, the extreme cold, or one kid couldn't play hockey in Ottawa because the ice has melted and he's sad. And literally, this is in their lawsuit. I'm taking those examples out of them; they're true. But they're poster children. Of course, they're a cross section, multiracial, just a perfect blend. And it's there's laws against using kids in advertising or targeting kids in advertising, but yet they're using them unabashedly for their own purposes. You look at Greta herself. She's a Swedish kid sitting on school steps in the spring, and in the fall, she's addressing the United Nations. How does that happen? It has absolutely nothing to do with her message. That has to do with a wildly successful campaign supported by a lot of very senior people to make that happen. Could you address the UN if you wanted with your years of energy experience, or could anyone? And then they sat there and they listened to her while she lectured them. It was just absurd, but that's the world we live in now. So I think, yeah, when you talk about the next Aaron Brockovich, yeah, it's coming for sure. I bet you there are groups like, if you could get somebody from National Resources Defense Council, who's a big player down in the States there on the climate activist scene, and they're an army of lawyers, and if you could pin someone down to actually answer your questions, I bet you they would say that they have things like that in the works. And I think there's like 1,000 lawsuits underway in the United States anyways over climate change. They get thrown out, but sooner or later one judge is going to side with them, and then they'll have a precedent, and then they'll be off and running. So
when Canada, when this happened with the lawsuit and everything along those lines, what were the kids talking about? How they were scared about, 10, 20, 30 years in the future? Was that kind of the basis behind it? At least in some of the places that I've seen in the States and Fargo, North Dakota, where they're demanding a climate emergency. One child, I think, was 13 and said they wanted to live to be the age of 30 or 40 or something like that.
Yeah, it's a kind of fear that they're talking about. And I think in the Canadian, I'm not that familiar with lawsuits. Luckily, mercifully, I've been out of court so far. But when I did read through their actual lawsuit, and they had a little profile of each child, and the child had to say how they were harmed so far. And so they said, I've been harmed by climate change because, and one kid has asthma or something, and because of climate change, there's more allergens in the air in spring, so she can't go outside, so she has to sit inside, and so she's deprived of nature. And one irony was that 3 of the 13 kids were they described not being able to enjoy their family vacation homes as much as they used to because of climate change. That irony seemed to escape a lot of people, that these poor kids couldn't go to their cottage by the lake or the ocean because of climate change, or they couldn't enjoy it as much. The wildest one was the kid from Ottawa who literally said, I like to play hockey, but sometimes I go and I prefer to play at an outdoor rink. And sometimes when I go to the outdoor rink, because of climate change, it's warm and there's no ice, and so I'm sad. Literally, that's the core of the lawsuit. And because they have to show how they're suffering, and then they get into their reduced life expectancy too. But they had to catalog all of the ways that they were suffering, and it's laughable, but the world laughed it up, and it'll take years for it to wind its way through Canadian courts. We can't do anything quickly here, except panic. But other than that, everything else moves at a snail's pace. So I'll let you know how it turns out in 5 years or so.
Yeah, please do. I'm just waiting for it to be cited in some sort of divorce hearing. Be like, climate change, we can't be married anymore. We can't do it. It's just, it's just being blamed for everything, It's just.
Well, did you see this is every day there's something new that just boggles my mind. But the United Nations passed a resolution, I think it was last week, where they said that being a refugee because of climate change is a legitimate means to try and enter another country. So what that means is someone that wants to come to the U.S., they could have a flood in their home country or a forest fire or whatever ailment you come up with to ascribe to climate change, which is everything these days. And if they want to come to the U.S. and want to get into the U.S., they can say, I fled my home country because I had to leave because climate change caused forest fires. And according to the United Nations, the U.S. or Canada or whoever it would be would have to accept that person as a refugee. Now, if that doesn't stop you in your tracks, I don't know what would. Because now, in theory, you could go, because they blame every weather event is now blamed on climate change, right? If it's a hurricane, if it's too cold, it's climate change. If it's too much snow, it's climate change. If it's too dry, it's climate change. Now, any one of those is an excuse for me to come into your country because I'm fleeing what's happening in mine. This is the United Nations. This is you can't make this stuff up, but it's happening. So I don't know what to say.
Absolutely incredible. Terry Etam, the BOE Report, Public Energy #1, and the author of The End of the Fossil Fuel Insanity, on the line with us here. And we're talking about some environmental issues as well as some international energy. And how is things in Canada, by the way, before we get into some other business at hand? I did want to just get a quick Canadian update from you. I know you're kind of in the natural gas sector, so are you guys having some business up there?
Not really. We're hanging on. It's a double whammy. Like we have our biggest hurdle is access to markets. We can't get our oil to Tidewater because we can't build any pipelines. Although there's one underway, but it's been underway for coming on a decade now, an expansion of an existing pipeline. We can't build any natural gas pipelines, although one is underway, but it gets you can spend $1 billion advancing a pipeline, and then two people can derail it for a year with some sort of protest or something. So we're a strangled market here. We can only sell our product to down to the U.S. into the interior of the continent, where you have your own glut going on. You have too much natural gas, you have too much oil, you have too much associated gas from the oil production, especially in the Permian and also in the Bakken. And so that's what we're competing with. So we can't get world prices for our product. And then on top of that, the regulatory burden, you're just starting to see it down there. That's what we've been living for a long time up here. You can't get anything done. Everything gets protested. Everything gets blocked by environmental groups. The regulations, and some of it is good quality preservation of habitat type regulations, and everyone can live with that in the business here. It's quite onerous, but we can live with that. But it's the political part that's just choking us off here. So, and then on top of that, there's the money's, a lot of money's fled the petroleum sector in Canada just because who wants to do business with the government like we have here? And then on top of that, there's the global movement to divest from fossil fuels, like you said, in Sacramento. It's the same thing here. If any public institution or pension fund or whatever that has any fossil fuel investments, they just get hounded mercilessly, and till they I don't know what they do about it, but some cave and sell their stuff, and some don't. But so yeah, it's not a very happy place up here. I look around downtown Calgary, and a third of the office towers, I think it's about 30% are vacant. So some buildings you can see right through them, and it's very grim times up here.
Well, I've just seen so much of what's happened up where you're at is trying to bleed its way down into the States, and
yeah, it's coming.
And I've seen it done through the public health debate, and they're doing, with setbacks and pollution and just all kinds of different things. And I thought it was very much like the smoking ban. I thought it was very much done through regulation, and it was done through the use of children and, public health type of a thing. Because when you're it's so easy to feel connected to the environment. And it
is, yeah.
And so you can see where, the activists and the environmentalists have really just taken a whole new approach to this, to where literally they could, like we said before, the texting, Keurig, drinking, texting, trolling, using smartphones. And I mean, they could be wearing plastic jumpsuits in protesting. It wouldn't even dawn on them. You know what I mean? To where...
No.
Has anybody in your government, because I have not heard it here, everybody gets caught up on the energy debate here, especially how much it costs to, heat something. And, do we, not want to heat, poor people? Does anybody even bring up the manufacturing side of things up in Canada when it comes to, like a phone, it's made out of plastic and parts and things like that, to where, just a simple thing like, syringes at the hospital, how much cost difference that would be, and would they even be safe anymore if they didn't have plastic sealing them? And does anybody even bring up anything outside of gas and heating homes as the debate, or are we still stuck on that?
Well, we can't even get past that, and they just go on the attack, and that's part of their program. They know that there's that we could gain traction if we got those messages right and out there, and some people do hear them, but they're ready for us. They say and the best example comes from ironically Elizabeth Warren, who's the most coherent. She's more coherent than our Canadian socialists, but she went on the attack in just recently in the CNN climate Democratic town hall or whatever. And they asked her about cell phones or about plastic bags, and she just turned that into this attack on the fossil fuel industry, saying, "Oh, that's a smokescreen. That's what they want to talk about. The fossil fuel industry, they want to talk about your plastic bags and stuff. It's just they're just trying to create these red herrings so to distract themselves from the pollution they're pumping into the atmosphere. So their messaging is." It's advanced and it's easy. It's like you said. I mean, if you ask the average person on the street, doesn't know anything about energy other than the cost of gasoline, and they might have heard that fracking is bad or something. But so if you walk up to the average citizen and say, "Would you prefer to get your power from the sun or would you from dirty oil?" And it's a no-brainer. Like, who wouldn't say I would prefer to get my power from the sun? They say, "Okay, well, you could, but these fossil fuel companies won't let you. What do you think of that?" And then they got a convert. It's like, "Oh, those damn fossil fuel companies! I could be running on solar now, but they won't let me, or they're blocking me, or whatever." And there you go. There's another member of the religion, and we've done a terrible job of standing up or getting in that process and saying that it's absurd, and you need to stop saying that, and you need to stop believing it. And it's so far gone that the politicians now, like Warren that I gave as an example, or Bernie Sanders or Michael Bloomberg, these people are about possibly to take the helm of the largest economy in the world, and they're spouting absolute nonsense like this. And politicians always spout nonsense to a certain degree, but this is we can see the consequences, right? We're in Europe, where in that article you sent, 40% of Romanians or something live in energy poverty. They can't afford their power bills and to live, and it's catastrophic for these people unless the government steps in and makes it all better. The government can't do that forever, but the politicians have absorbed this message, and they're so scared now of the environmental movement. We see that in Canada here, where our government declared a climate emergency, the federal government, and then they act like it too. But at the same time, there's enough. There's just a little glimmer of intelligence going on there, a little spark that says, "Wait a minute, we can't kill the petroleum industry yet, which is one reason that they're supporting one pipeline in Canada half-heartedly. And like if Warren or Sanders or whoever, if they ever do, heaven forbid, become the leader of the United States, that they're talking about banning fracking the day that they get in. Well, that will vaporize that argument because they'll realize the stupidity of that, and they will backpedal immediately. But for now, it makes a good message, right? Because it resonates with. Go to Los Angeles and ask someone what they think of fracking, and you'll learn all about fracking from someone that knows nothing about fracking, because their head's full of disinformation. So, and it's the same as New York or wherever. And urban centers are worse, because when you're in an urban center, everything comes to you automatically, and you don't think about it. You don't think about where your heat comes from. You don't think about food. Farmers are just a bunch of hicks out in the hinterland, and that's just their view. That's a bit of a stereotype, which I shouldn't propagate, but that's a crude way of saying that people just take everything for granted that shows up in their supermarket, and their fuel in their tank and the heat in their buildings, and they just don't think about it. And if someone says you don't need petroleum to get that stuff, we can do it with solar, they go, yeah, it sounds good to me, and there we are.
Where are the energy leaders on this? Where are the energy industry they spend billions of dollars in public relations, and there's associations and all kinds of groups that are paid specifically to go do and fight these battles. And I guess I look at it and to be this far behind, to where a 16-year-old girl got the headlining speech and all the media from the UN conference on climate change, and now it's directly against your industry. I don't want to shoot the messenger or anything like that, but at the same time, somebody's got to stand up and say it's time for a little industry gut check at the same time.
Yeah, it is, and it's and I wrote about this in the book. Is I think one of the problems, it's fundamentally, even though it's kind of a wildcatting kind of business, or it has been, it's a pretty conservative industry, the petroleum sector, and change is hard. It takes a long time, and I think for many decades, the petroleum sector has been used to dealing with governments. That's how they operated. The governments around the world, and even state governments and up here provincial governments, but almost every country in the world wanted their petroleum resources developed. So they wanted companies to come in. They held auctions for the rights to develop them. They still do that in Africa and other parts of the world. Norway just did it. They want these resources developed. So petroleum companies dealt with governments, and the governments made it happen. So now, in the past 10 years, which is not very long in the big scheme of things, governments have turned their backs on the petroleum sector, saying, we can't support you guys anymore. We don't want anything to do with you. You're pariahs now. And so that was the animal by which that operated for probably 100 years. And they're left on the pole. Well, wait a minute. Now governments won't support us. Now the public's been turned against us. And everybody's been convinced that they can live without petroleum, and they can't. But how do we start messaging now? And they're and in the warp speed of social media and digital messaging, and things move so quickly, and they're so good at it. These people that they hire a lot of kids that have grown up in this world too. And now you have these conservative old institutions trying to figure out, all right, let's set up a Twitter account here. Now what are we going to do? And then they put out some pablum on there that. And I wrote about that too in my book, which was the statistics about a year and a half old now. But ExxonMobil's Twitter account was it was a joke compared to any other amateur climate organization. And the tweets that they have, they put out a tweet and it would get like 50 likes or something. Well, Exxon has like 70,000 employees worldwide, and so. That's what their social media presence was. That's who it resonated with, was 50 people out there or something. I can't remember the exact number. Whereas you look at a green organization, then they'll put out some disinformation, and then it spreads out their network like wildfire. And 2 hours later, it's been recirculated everywhere. It's in the news. Everybody's talking about it, liking it. Where's Greta going next? It's just like a wildfire. And then the petroleum sector, is sitting there trying to figure out, well, how do we explain to people that lipstick is made with petroleum? And we spent 2 years working on that message, and then the world has changed infinitely in 2 years, and we're still trying to figure out those basics. So I think we need all of those old people that are running it. They need to hire a bunch of young digital whip smart kids and then educate them on the real role of petroleum in our society, and then turn them loose and say, and make them understand the consequences of not having it, which shouldn't be that hard, but we seem to have a challenge with it.
Well, therein lies the challenge. About 5 years ago, we started on the story about the retirement happening in the industry. 70% of the industry is supposed to be retired by 2022, and there's kind of a vetting process going. They call it the big cruise shift, where you've got, because in the 90s, remember, we had low oil prices, so there was a decade where the oil industry really didn't hire anybody. They just, they were on, cruise control basically for the 90s, and it wasn't until the new shale revolution. So you've got Gen X and millennials and even younger than the millennials now. So you got essentially 3 generations that oil and gas companies are faced with hiring. And I'll tell you what, there's an interesting thing going on, because I just saw a study the other day. We're going to be talking to them next week. It had to do with people in the oil and gas sector. Half of them are looking for jobs in the renewable sector. Think about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as you're vetting through your oil and gas professionals, yeah, you can bring in some young people, but you might be bringing in your own Trojan horse people, because these guys, as well as I do, there's a ton of people who just work for the check. They don't care about capitalism. They don't care about socialism. All they care about is once that tail gets pulled and that bird goes chirp, Fred Flintstone goes sliding down that tail at 5 o'clock, baby. Once that, once the dinner bell rings and the work's over. And there's other people that, hey, they'll go sleep on the well site for 4 straight days to make sure the monitors are right and the levels are right and everything's taken care of. There are some people that their work is their life, and a lot of times that was the oil and gas industry. But right now, it's going through a change. It is going through a change, and I see it every single day. I'm seeing guys that are trying to be activists. They're already tired. We haven't even started the political season. Yeah. We haven't even started it yet, and you guys are already tired. How does that happen?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that that the energy industry is conservative. I agree with you. And I do agree with you that they are very slow to change. But I also want to say one thing, that if they don't change is happening around them already.
I agree completely. Yep. It's,
And to me, that's kind of the message, is that the energy industry has to change. Otherwise, they're not going to have a choice in the change, because it's happening by a 16-year-old girl in an army of existential fear kids.
Right. And whether they're right or wrong, or whether it's crazy or not crazy, it's happening, like you said. So it doesn't do any good. It's in some ways we're an engineering-led business too, where things are engineers have a wonderfully efficient view of the world, where they think if something is so obvious, people will figure it out, but they won't figure it out. There's people just don't think about where their heat comes from, or where their food comes from, or where their fuel comes from. They're willing to be led by fear-driven institutions. So, yeah, we have to figure that game out.
Well, we'll continue to reach out to people across the borders, so much so we have Terry Etam on, the man of international content. He's an author of The End of the Fossil Fuel Insanity. He's a writer for the BOE Report, and he's a blogger for his own personal website, Public Energy Number 1. And he's also the man, the myth, the legend, and the author, writer, and blogger. So he's got a lot of nicknames. But wrapping up here, man, what's the takeaway? I mean, we're going to still continue to reach out to the kids. Us at the Crude Life, we're talking to college kids and high school kids, trying to get their perspective. We're doing what little we can. We don't get the big funds and, the big sponsorship dollars like all the other guys, like you. You and your big, look at me. I got best-selling book money. I'm being tongue-in-cheek here. So please support him, folks. He needs the support too. So no,
exactly.
What's next though? What do you think people should do? I mean, like I said, our strategy is for the last 3 years to try to reach out to people with an olive branch, with a steady hand, and inform and entertain and do that, not yell at people and not, that sort of thing. And is it working? I don't know, but it seems to. We're still growing with our numbers. What are you guys doing at your either your energy company that you work for or your media companies? How are you guys adapting to the change that's happening around us?
Well, on the company I work for, we're just producers, so we're in a bit of that bind where we just do what we've always done. We take our product to market and we hope for a good price. So, which is not a good strategy these days. We need to do as much value adding as we can. And I know there's some second order businesses that are springing up. How do you add value to natural gas? You can have power plants, or you can find some industries that are that require natural gas as a feedstock. And in the U.S., like, you have such a glut of gas. Like, there's so many industries that require cheap energy. So I think that's one way to look at it. On the more macro level, with the battleground against the climate scene, I think that we just have to just calm down and just look where we're at and try and be like they are and try and move ahead of them. Where are they going to go with their messaging next? And not just their messaging, but it is a train wreck. What they're pushing is a train wreck, and it's unfolding before our eyes. We see it in Germany. We saw it with the energy poverty, like we were talking about earlier, where the greener they get, the more problems they have. Essentially, if you rely on wind and solar, the Australia and United Kingdom, I'm writing a story about this, or not a story, but reporting on it, but their grids have become so reliant on renewables that they become unstable, and they're susceptible to these large-scale power outages. As California is becoming, they have to shut in large chunks of their grid under certain conditions, and part of that is because there's not enough maintenance spent on the grid to clear all the trees underneath. So the more we give money to the wind and solar factions, the less reliable our grids become, and the more people are going to suffer because of it. And it's happening out there, and it's happening in Germany where the costs are through the roof. It happened in Ontario where the costs went through the roof. And we need to get out. We need to start using these facts as a method of explaining to people, like, this is going to come out of your hide. There were a couple of surveys done in Canada and the United States last summer where they asked people, are you concerned about climate change? And, like, the majority of them say, oh, yes, we're concerned. It's like 75% in each country said we're concerned or extremely concerned. And then they asked the same people, how much are you willing to pay to do something about it? And in both countries, the answer was almost the same. About 90% of the people would not spend $500 a year to fight climate change, and just over half the population wouldn't spend $100 a year to fight climate change. So they say one thing, that they're scared because they're supposed to be scared, but when you say, okay, let's see your checkbook, they say, I'm not doing anything. So that's the cold hard reality, and that's where the public's mind is at, and we need to understand that, and we need to paint this picture for them. Like, okay, if these people that are telling you that we're going to go all wind and solar, renewable, they're telling you that. Here's the real life consequence of that. Your power bill could go up by $500 a month, not per year. Or maybe that's a bit harsh. That happens in extreme places like that Ontario example I gave. But if you're looking at $200 to $300 a month, which is certainly within the realm of possibility for these schemes, and a lot more if you want to go all renewable, it's going to be way higher. Do you understand that, people, that you're going to be spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year more on your power than you are right now, and you don't even consider it now, but you're going to. So those are those are facts that we can deal with, and that's something that we can work on making the general public understand too.
One thing I'll just end with is, and I'll give you opportunity to plug your sites one time, is, for me, I agree with you on what you're talking about and trying to educate and trying to get people to understand. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is that we live on a very active planet. And this planet, I remember when I was in the Bakken, out in Dickinson, North Dakota, and I had on somebody from the forest ranger on because I think there was a fire going on. And they showed me the number of lightning strikes that happened, and I was just astounded. And so I looked it up, and it was something like there's a lightning strike every 11 seconds on this planet, okay? And and then I looked in a little further, and like every 5-6 hours, there's a major earthquake, like a Richter 5 on this planet.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
And there's a tidal wave that crosses the Pacific Ocean every couple months. And there's just, these just monumental things that normally would just rock us to our core. They just happen every day, and they happen all the time. And so every time somebody comes out and they point to, the tragedy in Bangladesh or something that happened in Pakistan or this, wildfire started because of the lightning in Australia or whatever it might be. And they'll say it's the end of the world. And I just look at them and I say, no, it is the world. That is the world. You don't get it.
That's been happening forever.
That's been going on since before the dawn of man, and that is a very hard conversation to have. And it's too bad that our leaders out there, the ones that are funded and receive the resources from the energy companies, they can't stop that level of existential fear and just even dial it down. It's just it's something like I've never seen before. So how can people get entertained, educated, and informed on the fossil fuel industry and all the things that it does and brings to our lives, sir, with your view of the industry?
Well, the very best place to start is to buy my book. So how's that for a shameless plug?
That's and I couldn't have set you up any better either. I mean, it's like it's like
it up perfectly.
Oh, it's like an alley-oop, man. You're LeBron James and I'm anybody. I mean, that doesn't matter.
Anybody could have put that one in.
If you're LeBron, I could be anybody off the street and you'll look good. So, where can people get the book and your website and all that stuff?
Sure. My website is Public Energy #1. And the book is available. The book is The End of Fossil Fuel Insanity, and it's available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble online. And it was written for this very purpose, what we've been talking about, just to demystify this process for people, or this stalemate that we're in, where we're actively trying to kill off an industry that keeps us all alive, which should be, and I think it is, nonsensical to a lot of people. I think a lot of people are kind of stopped in their tracks by going, wait a minute, like, how does this work? I know I'm hearing this message in one ear about how we're all going to die because of fossil fuels, and at the same time, I can see that I use them every day. So, how do we get here? How can I make sense of this? And those are the people that I wrote the book for, the ones that are curious about that question. So.